Welcome to the World Prosperity Forum, Day 5, the fifth and final day here from Zurich, Switzerland, just up the road from the World Economic Forum, which has been much in the news this week. But here at the World Prosperity Forum, we are presenting the freedom-based, prosperity-focused alternative to the World Economic Forum. In Davos all week long, titans of industry, leaders of NGOs, politicians from around the world have been presenting their vision, a top-down vision, one in which the bureaucratic elites, you can see your example, for example, in Brussels for the European Union, would be running our world, running our individual nations to the extent they're permitted to still exist. And the results so far have been catastrophic. But there's hope. We don't all have to submit to that. And here at the World Prosperity Forum, we have been presenting that alternate vision all week, and we have our fifth and final day today in which we will be doing the same. So for our first presentation, I would like to talk about energy, because while we're talking about prosperity, we have to talk about energy. Energy, the cost of energy, the availability of energy is built into the price of every good and service bought, sold, and traded in our economies. When the price of energy goes up, for example, if there are refrigerators that are being shipped from Dallas to Chicago, the price of gasoline is a big factor. For a manufacturing plant, the price of electricity or on-site power production. All of these factors dictate how strongly our economy is going to perform and what our standards of living are going to be. And of course, that's just production for business, industry, and the overall economic health. When you pay higher gasoline prices, that comes directly out of your pocket. When you pay higher electricity prices, again, it comes directly out of your pocket and takes away money that you would otherwise have available for nutritious food, for quality housing, for better education, for parks and recreation. It's not just money for the sake of money. When we pay more money for electricity, we are reducing our standard of living and our quality of life. So energy, freedom, and prosperity, the reason why it's so important right now, let's go to the first slide there, Jim, if you're not already there. There are several critical challenges facing the grid. Actually, the grid is in its most imperiled state, probably since it was ever created. What we see right now, we see affordability being a big issue. Prices are rising, and we'll get into the exact numbers in just a moment. At the same time, reliability. Demand is growing. There's been a rapid increase in blackouts, and it's projected to go even higher. There's a reason for this. The reason is that there has been a tremendous increase in demand with AI and big tech data centers. At the same time, we've been moving away from reliable baseload sources like coal, natural gas, nuclear, and toward wind and solar for political reasons. The irony is that while policymakers must be aware that there are consequences for this. See, for example, New Jersey, Virginia, recent elections have shown that the price of electricity, the price of energy has been a huge factor in those races. Ironically, it's politicians who are supporting the more expensive sources, wind and solar, who have taken advantage of that. So hopefully our policymakers will get a better grasp of the true factors involved in this topic. And we at the Heartland Institute hope to give them that information. Next slide. So as I mentioned, electricity demand is growing and will continue to grow, especially with the boom in computing data centers and server farms that's necessary for artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Next slide. How much demand can we expect? Well, according to Grid Strategies report, and this is an entity that this is what they do. They get tuned in on what's happening with electricity, with business data. Here's what they say. The era of flat power demand is behind us. Nationwide electric demand is forecast to increase by 15.8% by 2029. Now let's stop for a moment on that. By 2029, you're talking 4 years, 15% growth. The grid, the electric grid, our national electric grid is a huge, complex system. We're not talking 15% growth in the demand for milk or 15% growth in sneaker demand. We have to build out the grid to handle 15% more electricity throughout the country. But it gets worse. According to ICF Global Consulting, They forecasted electricity demand is expected to grow by 25% by 2030. So this is a huge challenge. If we can't meet demand, that's when we get brownouts and blackouts. Next slide. And here we see the practical consequences of having not enough power to meet demand. So a U.S. Department of Energy report, the federal government understands this. They released a report about 6 months ago evaluating U.S. grid reliability and security. And what the report finds is if current retirement schedules, by that they mean the political decisions to shut down primarily coal power plants, but also nuclear, natural gas, to replace eventually with wind and solar power that's not baseload power generation. If current retirement schedules and incremental additions remain unchanged, most regions will face unacceptable reliability risks within 5 years, and the nation's electrical power grid will be unable to meet expected demand for AI, data centers, manufacturing, and industrialization while keeping the cost of living low for all Americans. Retirements plus load growth increase risk of power outages 100 times in 2030. Allowing 104 gigawatts of firm generation to retire by 2030 without timely replacement could lead to significant outages when weather conditions do not accommodate wind and solar generation. Modeling shows annual outage hours could increase from single digits today to more than 800 hours per year. That's where you have the 100-fold increase in blackouts. This is a U.S. Department of Energy report. And the key here is this. It's not just that we have to build out somewhere between 15 and 25% additions to the grid, which is an enormous enterprise. But on top of that, if we're shutting down coal power, and that's why the emphasis in this report, if current retirement schedules remain unchanged, we have to build an addition to that to compensate for the coal power plants especially, but also natural gas and nuclear that are being shut down for political purposes. So if we're looking at 25% electricity demand growth by 2030, we actually need to build out about 35% more to the grid if we're going to allow this politically driven shutdown of conventional existing baseload power plants. Next slide, please. There is a political consequence. If you are a policymaker, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, I don't care. I just want good policy. You can see what has happened when this challenge to the grid and electricity prices has continued unabated. So, for example, this is an article from CNBC, November 13th, 2025, just after the midterm elections. Well, not a midterm, but an off-year election. Skyrocketing electricity prices fuel political backlash against tech sector's AI data centers. Political backlash against the tech sector for their electricity demand and for stifling conventional energy production is good. But the timing of this article is not coincidental. It was just a week after the elections where in New Jersey and Virginia, the two highest profile races in the country, affordability and especially energy prices were the key topics in the debate. And because of that, elections were decided. Next slide. And that was acknowledged in the Washington Post here in November 19th, 2025. The headline, electricity bills are soaring and flipping seats. Again, if you're not on the right side of this issue, if you can't show your constituents that you are ahead of the game, there will be and have been consequences to pay, political consequences. With the demand increase that's coming, with the current pace of shutdowns for conventional power sources, if you're a policymaker in office today and you're facing voters in 2028, 2030, 2032, you better be able to say that you saw this coming and did your best to prevent it, or hopefully even fix it in your state or region before the push happens. Next slide. So, how are policymakers, regulators, federal and state, responding to this demand and this oncoming crisis? Well, the wrong solution is to eliminate conventional coal, natural gas power plants, existing baseload power sources, and replace them with wind and solar. The problem is, despite accelerating electricity demand and a shortage of rare earth minerals that are necessary for wind and solar, utilities are enacting net zero carbon dioxide plans that require the removing of crucial on-demand baseload power and requiring more utilization of rare earth minerals. Next slide. So to what extent are we seeing these eliminations? Well, in 2020, coal power provided 773,000 gigawatt hours of US electricity. In 2024, just 4 years later, that number fell to just 650,000 gigawatt hours. That's a drop of 15% of coal power production in just 4 years. And electricity demand is not dropping. Next slide. Now take a look at what the cost consequences are. From 2020 through 2024, so as we see that drop in coal power generation fell, if we look at the overall electricity mix, from 19% of our electric mix down to 15%. So what made up the difference? From 2020 through 2024, that same time period, US wind and solar power generation grew from 10% to 15% of the national electricity mix. So basically, you've taken 5%, a significant hunk of the power, kicked out coal, put in wind and solar. Next slide. What happens when you do this? What happens when you replace affordable coal power with wind and natural gas? Next slide, please. Well, here's some data. From 2010 to 2020, this 10-year period, US electricity prices rose at less than 1% per year. We were not getting electricity inflation at all. In just a 4-year period, 2020 through 2024, electricity prices rose 22%, more than 5 times faster the pace before then. Next slide, please. So during the past 4 years, American electricity prices have skyrocketed by 22%. In real terms, this has added more than $300 each and every year to average household electricity bills. By the way, that's just the direct electricity bills. Again, higher electricity prices are fueling inflation across the board for all the goods and services that we're purchasing. But just on your electricity bills alone, average household, you're paying an additional $300 each and every year for the same electricity that you had before. Totally unnecessary. Next slide. So why is it that wind and solar are higher priced than coal, nuclear, natural gas? Or really, can we say for sure that's the case? Because oftentimes we hear that wind and solar are already less expensive than coal and fossil fuels, or that soon to be more affordable. Well, let's take a look at the actual data. In a peer-reviewed science publication, and this is the Journal of Energy, peer-reviewed, energy economists examined what they call the levelized full system cost of electricity. The full system accounts for real-world added costs imposed by intermittency. So in other words, let's say the wind is not blowing sufficiently and you have to quickly switch on natural gas. Natural gas is powering the grid. The wind now picks up. Natural gas power plants still have to be running in the background so that when the wind dies down, we still have that power immediately. So that's added cost to the grid when you're having not just the wind generation, but natural gas power plant running in the background, not able to sell power. So intermittency, extended transmission line requirements. We can build a power plant, a conventional power plant, pretty much anywhere we want. So we can place one just outside Denver. We can place one on the outskirts of Chicago or Cleveland. But for wind and solar, it could be that, I won't say they're very good places for wind power generation, but the least bad ones, let's say the Iowa Plains, one of my home states, the West Texas Plains, far away from Houston, Dallas, wherever. It costs a tremendous amount of money to build transmission lines. It can cost in the billions of dollars for that. So you have to factor that in as costs that are attributed to wind and solar. Oftentimes they're not built into the numbers that renewable activists claim. They're just looking at the price of the product itself, not counting in what the costs were necessary that the whole grid had to absorb, no matter what power was generated. So that and other factors, they looked at the full system levelized cost of electricity. And here's what you get, the peer-reviewed data. Next slide, Jim. First of all, this is the best case scenario. They looked at 2 different regions to generate their numbers. So first they looked at, okay, where is an ideal place for wind and solar power generation? Some places are pretty decent for wind power. Some places are pretty decent for solar power. Where do we get them both? And what they came up with was Texas, and especially West Texas. So in what is a largely ideal place for wind and solar production, where their costs would be lower than most places, What they found is that on a dollars per megawatt hour basis, if you power the grid with natural gas, that's going to cost you $40 per megawatt hour. Coal, $90. Biomass, $117. Nuclear, $122. Wind, $291. Solar, $413 per megawatt hour. If you're going to build out your grid with wind power in an ideal place to do so, it's going to cost you 7 times what it would cost to build out a new natural gas power plant. If you're going to build it out with solar, it's going to cost you more than 10 times. Next slide. The next place they looked at for comparative cost was Germany. And Germany is going to be pretty similar to what you see in New Jersey, Michigan, some of the places where wind and solar have been advocated. It's more northerly, tends to be cloudier, not necessarily as windy as the high plains in the American West and plains. The numbers that they discovered and published here: natural gas, $35 per megawatt hour. Coal, $78. Biomass, $103. Nuclear, $105. Wind, $483. Solar, $1,380 per megawatt hour. What you're talking about now is to replace natural gas, conventional power with wind power, you are increasing costs by approximately 14 times what natural gas is. For solar power, it's amazing. It's about 40 times as expensive. This is the reason why electricity prices are so much more expensive where you have more wind and solar power. Next slide. In this chart, you see in a graphic form the cost of power per source in the best place scenario for wind and solar in Texas. Now, sometimes people will say to me, next slide, why can't we have all of the above? I'm for all of the above energy sources. We need it all. We need a lot of energy. We need it all. Well, there's plenty of natural gas, coal, nuclear to go around. But why would I want to make people purchase their electricity from the sources on the bars on the left? They rise sky high when I can have prices that are so low on the right. It reminds me, for example, I love to drink Diet Coke. Wish I didn't, but I do. All right, if I go to, let's say, the hotel where we're hosting the World Prosperity Forum, our conference room here, and I go down to the lobby and I get a Diet Pepsi because they don't have Diet Coke, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I'm paying about $5 per bottle. And there may be a time when I need it if I don't have anything else available. But if I go down to the grocery store just down the street, well, let's say I'll use my hometown grocery store in Florida because I know what they charge. I can buy a 6-pack of Diet Coke and it comes out to about $1.50 per bottle, much less expensive than I can get in a hotel here or in the States. And sometimes if they're running a special, I might get it for 75 cents a bottle on average, buying a 6-pack. And if I go to Costco, I know I can get as much as I want for 75 cents per bottle. I need Diet Coke. I can tell you I need a lot of Diet Coke, but I can get it from these very sources. I can get as much as I want. I'm not going to say I need all of the above to make sure I have Diet Coke. So I'm going to start buying $5 bottles at the hotel when I can get them for 75 cents elsewhere. It's the same thing with electricity. All of the above makes no sense if you're looking out for consumer prices, affordability, and your constituents' living standards. Next slide, please. So this data that I just presented, much of it is presented in the Heartland Institute policy brief, Affordable, Reliable, and Clean, an Objective Scorecard to assess competing energy sources. You can find this online. You can just do an internet search for Heartland Institute, Affordable, Reliable, Clean. And here is a print copy that I have with me, but you can download it digitally and get the same information. Next slide. So just in short summary, for Affordable, Reliable, Clean, the policy brief, what we found is that as we rank competing sources for power generation, natural gas is the gold standard as far as affordability. And you saw that in the numbers I presented. Coal is pretty good. Nuclear is pretty good. Hydro is pretty good. Natural gas is the gold standard. There's no reason for affordability reasons to shut down any of these existing power plants. And in fact, if we're looking for new generation, that's what we should be utilizing. Reliability. Can we know with confidence a day from now that we can get a certain amount of power production from a given source? Will we know a week from now, a month from now? Can we plan this out? So we rank reliability factors. Here we have natural gas, coal, and nuclear. Again, they are best. They're baseload power generation. Basically, you can produce as much as you want, when you want, on the schedule that you want. And finally, environmental impact. In other words, the clean component. And some people are surprised, but I'll walk you through it just a little bit. Natural gas is again best, then nuclear, then hydro, then coal. It may sound surprising to some because all we've heard is that the only environmental issue that matters is CO2 emissions, but there's a lot more than that than CO2 emissions. Next slide. So here we see, as an example, this is a screenshot from one of the pages of the Affordable, Reliable, Clean study. And we have not just the numbers, but we have green, blue, yellow, orange, red color coding. So at a quick glance, policymakers can see, all right, these are good sources, these are poor sources. Donald Kendall, who's spoken here a little bit during the forum, he is the person who put those graphics together. Fantastic job, Donald. Next slide. Affordable, reliable, clean, reliability. So what we do is, by the way, we rank. We don't just give numerical price data, for example, for affordability on the sources, then we rank them. So natural gas comes in at a 1 because it's the most affordable, all the way up to wind and solar, which get up to 10. So reliability, natural gas, coal, nuclear, they get the good score of a 1. You can count on them whenever you want and produce as much as you want. Biomass gets a 2, which is good. Hydro's a 3, which is pretty good. Wind power and solar power bring up the rear. Now, it's so important to understand that, again, environmental factors are important. I'll get into them in a minute, but you have to have affordability. If you think that's not important, talk to the policymakers in New Jersey and Virginia who lost their jobs. Talk to the American people who demand it to be able to meet their living standards. Reliability is key. If you can't count on the lights turning on when you flip the switch, the political consequences the policymakers have already faced for not keeping electricity affordable is going to be approximately, 10 times, 100 times more, because what's worse than having expensive power is no power at all. So before we get to the environmental clean component, just another couple points to make on reliability that are very important. Next slide. Huge threat is rare earth shortages. This has been in the news to a good deal lately as President Trump is looking to find and expand production of rare earth minerals here in the United States. And there's a reason that he feels compelled to do so. Most of the rare earth minerals that we use in this world are produced and or refined in China. The problem with that, not only is it just good to have it here in the United States, but China can and does already have a track record of weaponizing their export of rare earth minerals based upon political factors. If we're going to have our entire energy grid, energy production, energy utilization dependent on the goodwill of China, that's a huge reliability concern. So next slide. Here you see a screen grab from a news article, WION News, in July of this past year. And the title is Ford's Plants Now Shut for the Past 3 Weeks. Ford CEO developed domestic supply chain for rare earths. In other words, they were not getting enough rare earths from China. They had to shut down production of Ford auto plants, which is a huge factor in the American economy. We're dependent on foreign sources when we don't need to be. Those rare earth minerals are crucial for wind and solar power production equipment. They're not crucial for coal, natural, nuclear gas. Natural gas, nuclear. But for wind power and solar power, you have to have those rare earths. Next screen. Here's another screenshot. This is Chinese hold on solar power tech raises fresh sabotage fears in Europe. What happened recently is that in Europe and elsewhere in the United States, we have found that Chinese manufactured solar panels, which is pretty much the only place you're going to buy them, were implanted with kill switches, secretly implanted, just discovered, so that China, if they get in the huff with the United States, press the switch. If you're reliant on solar power, the lights don't go on. Economic chaos. Another reason for reliability concerns where we must have domestically produced and affordable natural gas, coal, nuclear, hydro. Next slide. All right, clean. Environmental impact. What we did in this study is that we looked at the various environmental factors that we want to take into consideration when we're assessing environmental impact. The climate activist lobby has convinced many people that the only environmental factor we should be considering is CO2 emissions. But I remember as I was growing up, what was most important was land conservation. Are we cutting down trees? Are we leveling open spaces? Are we affecting ecosystems? That's still an environmental concern, believe it or not, or at least it should be. There are other factors as well: water pollution, soil pollution, direct species kills. So we took a look at those topics and we gave the score, 0 being best, 10 being worst, on those topics. So starting off with emissions, yes, it is true, wind and solar power, they get a 0. Perfect score as far as emissions. Also, nuclear and hydro get a perfect score. They're emissions-free power sources. Natural gas is a 2, which is a very good score. Much fewer emissions than coal. Coal gets a 7, biomass gets a 7. But now let's look at the next factor, land conservation. What's interesting, well, I'll give you the scores first. Natural gas comes in best at 1, hydro and nuclear 2, coal 4, biomass 4, solar 6, wind 10. So why does wind get a score of 10? Scientists at Harvard University, who, by the way, believe in a climate crisis, who feel that they want to do everything possible to reduce CO2 emissions, they factored out how much wind power would we need to power our grid with wind power so that we can meet the goal that we're looking for. And what they found is we would literally have to place solar panels on 1/3 of America's landmass. We'd have to develop, whether it's open plains, forests, mountaintop ridges, coastal shorelines, 1/3 of our country. Think of the environmental destruction that would entail. Think of the ecosystems that would be destroyed. And by the way, if we mandated electrification of transportation, electric vehicles, like the Biden administration tried to do, that number jumps to 50%. You talk about an environmental hellscape, that is a land where we sacrifice all of our open spaces so we can say we're generating wind and solar. Next panel. So the next factor that we looked at is species kills. And here, once again, natural gas, nuclear, coal score pretty well. It's a power plant. You have a small footprint. It's a very basic process. Solar and wind do quite poorly. So, for example, studies based upon actual bird and bat counts show that literally millions of birds and bats are sliced to death in mid-flight each year due to wind turbines. At the same time, you have solar panels, for example, that are largely placed in the desert that take up not quite as much space as wind turbines, but still quite a bit, have been disrupting and causing the elimination of habitat, for example, for protected desert tortoises and other species. When you look at the environmental data on those species kills, again, wind and solar are environmentally devastating. Next slide, water and soil. Here, again, you see solar and wind finishing at the bottom, and you have conventional energy sources doing well. A couple reasons for that. First of all, the mining of rare earth minerals that's so necessary for wind and solar is the most environmentally destructive practice on the planet. They're called rare earth minerals, not because there's very few of them. It's because they don't form in clumps and veins and clusters where you can have a single mine and then produce quite a bit of the rare earth minerals. You have to excavate tremendous amounts of rock, dirt, soil to get a decent amount of rare earths. And once you get them, because they are not clumped together, you must process, usually through hydrological processes, you must process those minerals in order to utilize them. The toxic runoff is absolutely devastating, and a reason why most of this occurs in China, in Africa, in third world countries, where environmental concerns are not as much as they are here in the United States. So water and soil pollution, and we also look at not just the water, but the soil. When you have solar panels, for example, what scientists have found, environmental scientists have found, is that there's a leaching of the toxic elements into the soil. So solar panels have a good deal of toxic minerals, not just the rare earth minerals, which can be very toxic, but many others as well, lithium, etc. And over the course of time, these leach into the soil and poison the soil. Back in the 1970s, I remember the EPA being so concerned about many of the, I'm trying to think of a place in Buffalo, Love Canal, and places like that. What is happening as a result of the solar panels is comparative to that, but happening all over the country, where you have soil that is no longer practicable. You can no longer grow food there because it's being contaminated for the sake of wind and solar power. So next slide. Here is the total score for environmental impact, where you take into account the full spectrum of environmental factors. Natural gas, nuclear, finish first. Hydro next, coal next. And again, at the bottom, solar, biomass, and wind power. So that, in summary, is the affordable, reliable, and clean scorecard. That is the roadmap. Policymakers in the United States, but not just in the United States, but also in Germany and around the world. Where you have more wind and solar power, you're going to have more expensive energy. You're going to have less reliable energy. You're going to have blackouts like what was experienced in Spain this year. And just as importantly, because we should care about the environment, we should be good stewards of the environment. I can tell you, I love going out into the wild. I love just celebrating the beauty of nature and the wilderness. We need to protect that. And wind and solar power are absolutely the most devastating forms of electricity production that you can have. It's not just CO2 emissions. We had great presentations yesterday about the supposed CO2, the climate crisis, how it's really not a crisis. But regardless, even if you believe in it, factor in these other environmental factors, especially land conservation. Now, at the Heartland Institute, let me just conclude by saying that this study, affordable, reliable, and clean, we have sent hundreds of copies of these to policymakers around the United States, and it's been a tremendous hit. It's very helpful to have in your bag of weapons, your arsenal, not just to produce and pass good legislation that protects conventional energy, but also to respond to the myths you hear in the media, such as wind and solar are already less expensive. The data that we present is largely specific to America in this study. But appropriately enough, here at the World Prosperity Forum, we are currently in the process of putting together affordable, reliable, and clean for the UK, affordable, reliable, and clean for Austria, affordable, reliable, and clean for Poland. And this is at the request of policymakers in those countries. We might be able to put one together for the EU as a whole, but it's coming soon to a country near you. For the data that you need, both as a concerned citizen and as a policymaker, those who are watching, do an internet search or go to the Heartland Institute website, affordable, reliable, clean, and you'll see the backup for everything here.